Shoot.
Okay, John Landry is coming to us from the Midway Museum, and he's give talks fairly regularly.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to this on the Battle of Coral Sea. John was born in Detroit and was an architect, and we won't hold that against him. No, thank you. But he's got Navy experience, and he joined in '62, was it? Commissioned in '62,
Correct.
And then he's got some, you know, he was everywhere. You know how the Navy guys are. Okay, we're pointing, we're coming, okay. You know, he spent a lot of time on a lot of ships. I just learned that he was involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, like on board, and there's the bad guys and that kind of thing. So we're going to try to get him to talk about that down the road a little bit. But, he was in '65, he moved to a submarine squadron back in Michigan.
And the reserves.
Yeah, don't they like Detroit on fire like every once a year? Or?
Yeah, I think
Right? I don't get that. He's retired, and he's got 3 children and lots of grandchildren. Nice work. Nice
Yes.
work. Okay, with that, John Landry.
Let me get you.
Thank you very much, everybody. How's everybody doing this morning? Good? I'm doing great. I love being here. I love talking about the Battle of Coral Sea. The Battle of Coral Sea is a very, very significant battle in the battles of early Pacific World War II. This is a picture of our beloved museum tied up to Navy Pier in San Diego. This is a better picture of it. This particular building is not there anymore. They're going to build Freedom Park right next to the Midway. Midway was named after the Battle of Midway. It was commissioned in September of 1945. Served for 47 years. And it was also the flagship of Operation Desert Storm. And we've been lucky enough to see this year our 20 millionth visitor aboard the USS Midway. We're very proud of that. I happen to be on my duty station Sunday afternoon last year, and we had 7,500 people on board in one day. So we're getting the visitors, and we're very proud of that. I love the byline of the Phantom Squadron. Our Phantoms don't say boo. I love that. Okay, so here we are. Welcome to the Battle of Coral Sea, a very significant battle in the early World War II years of the Pacific. This is a Navy Dauntless dive bomber. Put yourself in the seat of that bomber and imagine yourself diving in this manner and pulling out the last minute. Is a great feat, and our guys were very, very good at doing that. This is going to feature our U.S. Navy carrier pilots, and this particular presentation is part of our lecture series. As we all know, Pearl Harbor first in '41. Then the Doolittle Raid, that's another presentation that we give as part of our series. And then this one, the Battle of Coral Sea, which will have a major impact on the Battle of Midway, which you will see later in the presentation. Coral Sea occurred these dates, and Japan had a strategic plan which was basically to rule all of East Asia with their emperor. And they, between 1910 and 1942, they had spectacular success acquiring invasion of the territories in East Asia. As you can see here, Philippines, Vietnam, Indonesia, Thailand. They actually annexed South Korea in 1910. And this led to what we call the victory disease for the Japanese military. And they believed that they had the manifest destiny to, in fact, rule East Asia. Their basic plan was as they did capture the oil resources here. Japan was resource negative, if you will, and one of the major factors in their aggression was to obtain resources, both oil here, coal up in Manchuria, and they eventually did attack Pearl Harbor. So, as you can see, they're moving down towards Australia. This is where the Battle of Coral Sea comes in, and they eventually wanted to pick Midway, also partly as a defense mechanism for their homeland, and eventually they wanted to take Hawaii, and then also they wanted to move into Micronesia for things like phosphorus and other resources for making ammunition. So this was their basic plan. And you can see the phosphorus for ammunition explosions, fertilizer, and glass down here. And then this was the oil pipeline back to Japan. The United States, later in the war, used their submarines to intercept that oil pipeline. But that was the Japanese plan. And they also wanted to cut off our supply of Australia and eventually use Australia as a base to move into Micronesia and this part of the Pacific. They also, the Doolittle raid taught them a lesson that we could strike Japan from our carriers at any time. So they got very defensive, and they wanted to establish through Midway and Micronesian islands, they wanted to establish a defense perimeter, and that was part of their plan. Our plan, strategic plan, was simple. By the way, that's Admiral King, who was the equivalent of Yamamoto's command. Our plan was simple, to maintain this line of communication with Australia, save Australia, and then eventually have MacArthur start from a base in Australia and island hop all the way to Japan. This is the command structure. We had Admiral Nimitz in Pearl Harbor, Admiral King back in Washington, of course Yamamoto up on the left there, the Supreme Commander, and then Admiral Inouye, who was in charge of the battle at Coral Sea, and then General MacArthur was hanging out in Brisbane until we could start our island hopping tour. One of the main aspects of the Japanese attack in Operation MO, which was to attack Port Moresby in New Guinea, was to do it in secret. And it was an essential part of their plan, as you will see in this presentation, that we were superior in intel, and we were able to intercept and decode parts of the Japanese diplomatic code, JM-25. So now, Pearl Harbor is 4,300 miles away from the Battle of Coral Sea. This is where the battle occurred. Operation MO was meant to take Port Moresby and then eventually come back in and take Australia and move towards Micronesia and the resources there. The area of the Coral Sea is immense. This is just to give you an idea, excuse me, where Port Moresby is, Australia, and anything that's in yellow was, at this point, before the battle started, was part of an Allied stronghold. The blue are areas that eventually, as the Japanese moved into this area, they took these points for reasons we'll talk about later. The commanders on either side was Admiral Takagi of the Carrier Force number 5, and tactical control was given to Admiral Hara, and the same thing on this side. Fletcher was the Admiral of Task Force 17, and Finch was the tactical commander. In other words, the person who was making the decision of when to attack, how many planes, etc. So the Battle of Coral Sea happens in this very, very small area. The diameter of the Coral Sea, which we'll see later, is some 1,100 miles. Distance between here and Seattle. It's a huge area. Remember also, during this period of time, we didn't have satellites. Being able to locate the enemy is a huge problem. We did have radar. We had radar. Japanese did not. Our radar was very basic. So finding the enemy in this huge ocean was a big deal. But after all of the looking and finding, we eventually ended up in a little square like this, about 100 miles and square. We'll talk about that in a little bit. By the way, if you have questions as we go, I'll be happy to take them. Yes?
Yeah, you talked about island hopping. Did island hopping happen after?
Yes.
So that was, okay.
Yeah, that was a plan. That was a plan. Yes. So 150 miles, roughly 150 miles square. Port Moresby up on the left. This is some 500 miles southeast. Tulagi, which was a Imperial Japanese Navy base, was some 300 miles to the northeast. This was the first battle between aircraft carriers. We are in a period in 1930 where the battleship Navy was getting less effective. The aircraft Navy was getting to become the capital ship of the United States Navy. The battleship sailors didn't like that. They resisted that. But in fact, we have this monumental shift to capital ships. And this is the first battle where we got into a battle of aircraft carriers. Our tactical skills, we were on the learning curve. And you'll see that in this battle. These are the two carriers that were in the battle, the Lexington, CV-2, and then the USS Yorktown, CV-5. For those who don't know, the 2 and the 5 mean that they're the 2nd and the 5th aircraft carrier that was authorized by Congress. The CV, the Midway was the 41st carrier authorized by Congress. These are the carriers that the Japanese showed up with. Zuikaku, Shokaku, the 2 newest aircraft carriers in their arsenal. They had 6 carriers at this point in the Navy. These 2 carriers were commissioned in December of 1941. And then there was a light carrier, Shoho, was intended to provide cover for the landing force for the attack on Port Moresby. This is the first time that all the damage is caused by naval aircraft. And another thing that occurs here is that the carriers did not see one another. This was over the horizon battles, and over the horizon means you've got to be able to locate the enemy. And the new tactical imperative, which we just learned about because we just started battling in aircraft carriers, the imperative was find the other guy first, attack them first, and then you'll most likely have a success. So reconnaissance and knowing where the enemy is imperative in aircraft carrier battles, and you'll see that a little later here. Well, this is our SPD dive bomber, a fantastic Air Force airplane. It did one hell of a lot of damage to the Japanese fleet, not only here, but later in the war. This is the Japanese Zero, which at that time was considered to be the best fighter of its time. Now we just talked about this. The battleship range was like 20 miles. The carrier range is around 300 miles. Give you a feel for that. All right, so now we talked about the vastness of the Coral Sea. We just talked about that, 1,100 miles. And you got to find an aircraft carrier group And one of the ways that you do that is the Japanese established a reconnaissance base on Tulagi with float planes that could cover the entire area. So they had an advantage in the physical contact area of the war, of the battle rather. We had the intelligence, and the intelligence was far more useful than their planes. Consider this, that the area of the Coral Sea is equal to the area of all these states: California, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, half of Colorado, and half of New Mexico. Our ships are running around in this area at 20 knots, 20 miles an hour. So it gives you a little feel for the challenge of finding the enemy. This is the way the Japanese found the enemy. They had a flying boat, 4,000 miles ferry range. We had the PBYs, 2,500 miles, and we relied on them to find the enemy for us. We also had scouts that we could launch from the aircraft carriers, 450 miles, and their scout had a 600-mile range. We had radar, very basic. It will come into play in the Battle of Coral Sea, as you'll see later. And this is the imperative that I talked about earlier. Well, in 41, the world was in war. Japan had attacked China in 1937. Germany attacked Poland in 1939. We got attacked at Pearl Harbor. Things were going really hot and heavy at this particular time. The United States was fighting a two-ocean war, one with Germany, one with Japan. There were more ships sunk off the coast of the United States by U-boats than anywhere else, and more lives lost in the merchant marine fleet here than were lost at Pearl Harbor. So things were heating up for the United States. We all know about this attack, and this is what Yamamoto had to say, who was very much against attacking Pearl Harbor. But oddly enough, ironically, he was put in charge of the attack on Pearl Harbor. So I call this the Battle of Titans. This is the Yorktown CV-5, commissioned in September 1937. This is the Lexington, same year, 14 December. And this is the Shokaku, their newest aircraft carrier, a very formidable aircraft carrier. And the Japanese at this time had the best Navy in the entire world. And this is the Zuikaku, commissioned likewise in 1941. This is the, excuse me, the light carrier Shoho, and that was intended to provide air cover for the land forces that were going to attack Port Moresby. Well, here's where we had the superior hand in this battle. It was our intel system. And it was Operation Hypo on Pearl Harbor. Oddly enough, when the Japanese struck Pearl Harbor, they did not strike Operation Hypo. It was in the administration building. But this, it turns out that the Japanese would have been very wise to take out Operation Hypo, because eventually our ability to break their codes gave us a tremendous advantage, a tactical advantage. This is Operation Hypo. All the guys down in the dungeon, so supposedly this is the administration building, and this is Commander Rochefort and Commander Layton. Superb intel people. They really knew their stuff. This was the intel network we had between Philippines, Australia, Hawaii, and Washington, D.C. until, of course, the Japanese took us out in the Philippines. So again, I reemphasize the Japanese intended to do this as a secret operation. Well, in April, Operation Hypo breaks the Japanese diplomatic, naval and diplomatic code. So now we have advance notice that they're going to attack Port Moresby. These are the kinds of things that our field commanders, our aircraft carriers would get in advance during the Battle of Coral Sea. Nimitz trusted intel, and Nimitz used it effectively. There's always this gamble about, well, are these intel people correct? Nimitz didn't waver at all. He knew that they were good. He stuck with them, and he was very wise to do that. All right, here's the battlefield plot in sense of this is Nimitz, Fletcher, tactical control to Admiral Finch, and the Australians provided 2 ships under Admiral Crace, Task Force 44, a couple of cruisers. And then on the other side, we have the Japanese Carrier Division number 5, which is the Zuikaku and the Suikaku. And now, if you guys study this, I can stop the presentation right at this point. This is everything you need to know about the Battle of Midway. We are going to work our way through this chart, okay, but we're going to look at it a little differently. So, there's another way to look at this same data. The red box indicates the general area of operations for the Japanese fleet. Up to the north, as you will see, they snuck around this way, came in here, and Admiral Fletcher and Task Force 17 operated generally in the south area. Looking at it in a little more detail, they did intersect, and this is exactly where the battle ends up taking place. All right, so this is a little exercise in connecting the dots. We've all heard that in our lives. So when we connect the dots, and by the way, all this stuff this is the date, this is the time of significant events. And so I'm going to quickly run through this. We will get to this in more detail in the battle, but this is, the yellow is Admiral Fletcher. And this is at the beginning of his appearance in the Coral Sea area. And he rushes north to do an attack on Tulagi, and then gets out of Dodge. He comes back on the 6th of May. He refuels here. He refuels again here on the 6th of May. And then again, the 6th of May at 1930 hours, he doesn't know that he is 70 miles away from Takagi. This becomes a very significant point in the battle, which you will see a little bit later. Eventually, we attack the Soho, the light carrier, which is and the invasion force is coming down this way through the John Bard Passage, and then eventually Fletcher does a U-turn here, and eventually on the 8th, he engages in the Battle of Coral Sea. And when we attack, we use these aircraft. This is the torpedo bomber, the dive bomber, and then our fighter F-4F for air protection. And then after the battle, the departure. So this is, here's the Japanese fleet, the 2 major carriers, Carrier Task Force 5, Zuikaku and Suikaku. They come around the corner here, and they are searching for Task Force 17. At this point, on the 6th of May, at 10 o'clock in the morning, one of their planes locates Fletcher. He heads south to engage Fletcher, gets to this point, and at 19:30 in the evening, 7:30 in the evening, and decides he's going to attack in the morning. At that point, the Japanese could have taken our fleet out. We had no idea that they were 70 miles away from us. And then eventually, they attacked both our oiler and our destroyer. We'll talk about that later. And eventually they find us, and we both find one another at the same time. They launched these aircraft, which is this is a dive bomber, torpedo bomber, and this is their Zero. That is a fighter for fighter cover. And that's what the dots look like when they're connected. It gives you a little easier picture to follow, and we're going to talk about that now. So now the first thing the Japanese do is they capture Rabaul and Leh and Tulagi, and they are going to do their recon out of those bases. As you can see, they had quite a bit of range using their flying boat. Now, once the Japanese, if I go back here, once the Japanese took Leh, Rabaul, and Tulagi, then Admiral Nimitz reacted strongly to that Japanese invasion of those areas. His intention was to stop their forward movement into the southeast. And he sent Task Force 17 under Admiral Fletcher, 2 carriers, 8 cruisers, 14, and so on. This is the Lexington, Yorktown. This is the entire group. You can spend a lot of time on detail here, but it gives you an impression of the number of ships that we had down there under Task Force 17. Now, the Japanese are unaware that we're there on May 3rd. So now between the 4th of May and the 6th of May, it's a matter of searching, refueling, misidentifying targets, and searching again. And on 4 May, this is where Admiral Takagi breaks up the strength of his force, which was not a very wise thing to do. He took the Yorktown separately and headed north to run an attack on Tulagi, which was a recon base for the Japanese. So he was lucky because he got away with it. He got in, took the attack, and got out. But that was not, you want to keep your forces together. So he's here. This is Fletcher. Here's Task Force, the Division 5. The 2 Japanese air carriers are just around the corner. If they knew that Fletcher was there, they would just hustle, get around the corner, and take him out. But he was lucky. He, at 6:30 in the morning, on 4 May, he makes 3 attacks on Tulagi. None of them were very effective. That base was operational in 2 days. So fortunately, he gets out of Dodge quickly and heads south. And now, Takagi, the Japanese, because of that attack, know we have an American carrier group in the area. So now Takagi, is intent on finding Task Force 17 and crushing them. So here we are, 4th to 5th, search and search again. Takagi, finally, one of his float planes locates Fletcher at this location. Fortunately, Fletcher's under a little bit of cloud cover. So at this point, at 1000 hours on the 6th of May, Takagi intends, he launches a whole bunch of planes and intends to attack Fletcher. And this is where he heads south, and at late in the evening decides he's not going to attack at night. And he doesn't know he's 70 miles away from our force, thankfully. So Takagi heads north and ends up at midnight in this location. All right, on 7 May, we get some combat. One of Takagi's scouts locates and reports seeing a carrier formation to the south. What he actually sees is our oiler and a destroyer, escort. So Hera decides that he, without confirmation of the contact, he's going to send his forces south, and he does. He sends something like 50 planes south, fighters, bombers, torpedo bombers, and the Sims gets hit with 3 bombs, sinks immediately. Neosho gets crippled with 7 hits, and eventually floats for many days before our forces are able to find them and rescue part of their crew. And then we send a destroyer out to scuttle the Neosho. And now Fletcher has limited refueling. He only has 1 oiler. So that complicates the tactical picture, if you will. The Japanese don't know where we are now, at this point. So now the idea is for everybody to locate the other force. And so Fletcher sends out a scout crew to the north. And Operation Hypo gives Fletcher the location of Takagi's force. Fletcher sends a recon mission to locate all the carriers, and they start by heading north, and eventually they get a contact. And a code of contact sent back to Fletcher that the scout has located 2 carriers and 4 cruisers. This is a misidentified contact. This is the pilot put in the wrong contact code back to Fletcher, and it was actually 1 light carrier, the Soho, and a few other miscellaneous ships. However, Fletcher didn't know that. He thinks it's the carrier force, so he launches an all-out attack. And thinking he's attacking Carrier Division 5, he sends 93 aircraft and heads towards the contact, and 1 hour later, they find out that there isn't a major carrier. It's the light carrier Soho of the main body force. So in the first wave, Lexington comes in with their dive bombers, and they go after the Soho, and as it turns out, they miss. Second wave comes in with the Lexington dive bombers. This time we get 2 hits. They penetrated the flight deck, and now they go down into the hangar deck where all the aircraft are. That causes explosions and fires. And this is an actual Navy picture with the Shoho battling two major bomb explosions aboard their ship. The next wave, the dive bombers come in from the Lexington, torpedo bombers, and they get 5 torpedo hits on it, as you can see here. And now Shoho is in dire straits, and then we have a 4th wave that comes in, and believe it or not, the 4th wave gets 11 more bomb hits. It was a little bit of an overkill, of course.
Yeah.
However, our guys were ready to go.
Yeah.
And of course, then the Shoho eventually has to Commander Robert Dixon, who is in charge of one of the torpedo squadrons, radios back to Fletcher, scratch 1 flat top, and indeed the Soho sinks with these casualties, with a small number rescued. And the important thing is, in a way, now recalls the entire invasion force back to Raval. So we've effectively stopped the Japanese from invading Port Moresby, but there's more to come. So here's where we shattered the air wing of the Zuikaku. It turns out that Takagi sends out another scout, and the scout reports a contact, which is actually Admiral Crace's 2 cruisers, but the scout reports back seeing an aircraft carrier force. Another misidentified contact, and we actually see 2 cruisers and 2 destroyers. Hera again launches a major attack, thinking he's attacking our Task Force 17. He sends out 8 scout bombers. And while they're en route, some 280 miles away, they eventually arrive and they start to attack Admiral Crace, and Admiral Crace did a fabulous job. They didn't get hit or hurt at all, and they repel the attack. 1 hour later, Hera gets impatient, and he sends a second wave out. And this second wave is 12 dive bombers and 15 torpedo bombers. He doesn't know he's attacking a very small force. So the second wave returns, and now our radar comes into play. The radar on the Yorktown sees the force going back after a misadvised attack on Crace. And they came back with 27 aircraft are going back, but a very interesting thing happens. Now, Fletcher sends 11 fighters out there to take him out. And so now we have a dogfight between 27 second wave aircraft and 11 US fighters. And in this dogfight, the Japanese lose 9 aircraft, and they get out of Dodge and want to get back to their ship late at night at 8 o'clock in the evening. And the pilots intend to fly to the Zuikaku, but guess what happens? They misidentify and want to land on the Yorktown. So as they're coming down to land on the Yorktown, of course the Yorktown opens up on them with AA, and they get out of town, but worse is yet to come. So they manage to escape that. Then they find the Zuikaku, and guess what happens? 11 aircraft are lost in night landings. Okay? So we have effectively decimated the air wing of the Zuikaku and has got them out of the action. And they're taken out of action and sent back to Japan, and they're not available for the Battle of Midway. This is one of the significant aspects of the Battle of Coral Sea. So now, what's left is for us to have the Titans fight one another, major aircraft carriers. After all the searching of the vastness of the Coral Sea, we're going to end up in a 150-mile square area. And both sides think they know where the other force is, and they're intent on doing battle. And so we send search planes out. O'Hara is up here on Zuikaku, just going to search to the south. And Fitch decides he's going to search in a circular pattern And eventually, we get on 8 May at 8:20 in the morning, enemy contact. Lieutenant Joseph Smith locates Takagi, and Kenzo Kano, one of their famous pilots, locates Fletcher and Task Force 17. Both task forces turn toward one another to close the distance. There's about 200 miles between them. And at between 8:40 and 9:15, there's a simultaneous attack. We're going to start with the U.S. Attack first. We send 75 aircraft out. Again, this is our fighter, F-4F, and this is our torpedo bomber and our dive bomber. 1.5 hours later, the U.S. attack begins in 4 waves. The first wave being the Yorktown dive bombers. They're going to attack the Shokaku, and they come in with their dive bombers, and this is Commander William Birch, who gets the first hit on the Shokaku, and this is what it looks like. They get hit up on the nose of the ship in forecastle, and this is what the dive bomber looks like when it releases its bomb, and the carrier is making massive evasive maneuvers. However, the bomb is going to hit right up on the nose of the ship. This is an actual Navy picture of the bomb explosion right at that point. There were near misses, and so now the Shokaku is hit with 1 bomb, and Lieutenant Powers is making a run at the Shokaku, but while coming in, he gets hit by a Zero, and his plane catches fire. But he pursues the attack, and eventually is able to release his bomb and get a hit right amidships. But unfortunately, he was killed by his own. He couldn't pull out soon enough because of the damage on his aircraft, so he got killed by his own shrapnel, and ended up with Medal of Honor for that. He was killed in action. So right behind, the Yorktown attacks the Shokaku with torpedo bombers. They come in, the torpedo bombers got to come in level, about 100 feet off the water. They can't do any maneuvering. They just got to keep coming in, release their fish, and then they can pull up. So they're a target. They're definitely a target as they come in. So this is what our torpedo bombers look like. Fishes away, and we come in, and we get no hits. Lexington comes in 30 minutes later with a 3rd wave, the dive bombers, and at this point we get another hit astern of the Shokaku, and this effectively puts Shokaku out of commission. So it's not going to show up at Pearl Harbor as well. Now, Zuikaku was under cloud cover, and now we're going to run a dive bomber attack on the Zuikaku, which is up north underneath cloud cover. But then the cloud cover dissipates, we get a chance to strike Zuikaku, we come in, and we get some near misses, no damage, and then we come in with some torpedo bombers from the Lexington, and we fire 11 torpedoes. These are the Mark 13 torpedoes, and we'll talk about that in a minute, and we get no hits. At this point in the war, the Mark 13 torpedo was almost, you could call it a piece of garbage. It did not function well. It took us 2 years to get our torpedoes to the point where they were effective in a naval battle. So this is the Mark 13 torpedo.
What was the issue?
Fuses wouldn't work. They would dive underneath. You know, they wouldn't.
Yeah.
They would fishtail. You know, all kinds of crazy stuff.
Yeah.
Okay, so there we go. Shukako has all kinds of damage, and it retreats from the battlefield. The air wing for the Zuikaku is decimated. It retreats from the battlefield. And now the Japanese, during this same period of time, they attack us. And Task Force 17, they launched 69 aircraft, same complement, dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighter cover. 2 hours later, they begin their attack in 2 waves. There's a 4 torpedo bomber attack on Yorktown and a 14 bomber attack, torpedo bomber attack on Lexington. The first one is the Yorktown, and the Yorktown is going to get hit. Well, I'm sorry, the torpedo bombers are going to attack Yorktown first, and Yorktown was able to evade all of those torpedoes. Then this is the attack on the Lexington with 14 torpedo bombers. And in this case, the Lexington is going to get hit by 7 torpedoes. And, sorry, I got that wrong. There's 7 torpedo bombers, and we're going to get 2 torpedo hits. And then comes another attack, this one on the Lexington. This would be dive bombers. They come in, and at this point, we have 2 torpedo hits, and now we get 2 bomb hits. One right down the island portion of the ship, and one forward on the flight deck. And this gives you an idea of the hits on the Lexington. 2 torpedo hits, 1 bomb hit down the stack, and 1 forward on the flight deck. This gives you an idea of how the Lexington was hit. And this is the Lexington under attack. Then there's an attack on the Yorktown, dive bomber attack. And in this case, the Yorktown gets hit with 1 bomb that penetrates 6 levels down in the ship. It kills about 60 people, and there are a bunch of near misses which really caused some structural damage to the Yorktown. This is a picture in the hangar deck looking up towards the flight deck of the hole that went through the flight deck. Eventually that bomb went all the way down. This is 6 levels down, and now damage control's got to do a hell of a job. And Lieutenant Ricketts was in charge of the damage control team. He eventually died in his attempts to keep the ship afloat, which they did. And in 30 minutes, the Battle of Coral Sea is over. Japanese believe they have sunk 2 carriers. However, the Yorktown does in fact return to Pearl Harbor, gets towed back. So after the combat part of it, the Lady Lexington fights to survive. And it does a pretty good job. This is 12:30 on May 8th. And then at 12:47, there's a massive explosion in the hangar deck. Fuel fumes were ignited by a generator, and boom, we had a massive explosion, and now the Lexington's in some pretty serious trouble. And then 3 hours later, there's another explosion aboard the Lexington, and as you can guess, this is going to be the end of the Lexington. you can see aircraft right here being jettisoned, off of the Lexington. This is a picture of the Lexington at 1500 hours, 1525. Other destroyers are there to try and help do what they could. And then at 1700, the captain calls for abandoned ship. And all these little dots that you see here are sailors that are rappelling down, abandoning ship. And ships in this condition, these 3 officers are still on board. It's amazing that they didn't die, in my mind. But eventually they give the order at 1800 hours to have those 3, the captain leaves the ship, and eventually we send the Phelps out to scuttle the Lexington. Unfortunately, 216 of the ship's crew goes down with the Lexington. In a way, it has its forces retreat, and there's the scorecard of the battle itself. So Admiral Nimitz has effectively repelled and denied the Japanese at Port Moresby. And for the Japanese, this is the beginning of the end of World War II. They lost 2 major carriers to be useful for the attack on Midway. And we know what happened to the remaining 4 carriers at the Battle of Midway. So the Battle of Coral Sea turns, in my mind, out to be a pivotal battle. We have Medal of Honor recipients as part of this battle. What was happening here was the victory deceive took over. The Japanese were careless, and they made a strategic, Yamamoto made a strategic blunder by offering his 2 newest carriers for Operation MO, when that was a minor operation compared to an operation on the Battle of Midway. They should have done that just in the reverse. All right, we achieved our primary objective, and this is where they started before the Battle of Midway, and this is what they attacked Pearl Harbor with, 4 carriers instead of 6. And thank you very much. Take some questions.
From a strategy point of view, would the torpedo bomber be the first in versus a dive bomber, typically?
Yeah, they want air cover for those guys, and they would bring them in first.
First.
Yes.
Torpedoes first.
Yes.
Then, but at Midway, our success was the dive bomber going vertical.
At Midway?
Yeah.
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 And that's because the air cover wasn't there for the torpedo bombers.
Yeah, because the air cover took off
Yeah,
the torpedo bomber,
That's,
right?
that's another one of these chess games.
Yes.
For Midway.
Yeah,
Who was where, when.
yeah.
We have any other, yes, sir?
How far out did they launch the torpedoes?
How far out do they launch?
Did
They get in pretty close. They get within about 1,000 yards, a couple thousand yards,
Yeah.
for sure.
Were the decks on the carriers wood or metal?
The decks on Lexington were wood, and yeah, I don't know.
I think they were all wood.
Yeah, I think they were all wood.
So obviously you got that.
I think Midway was. Anyway, I'd have to research that. Thank you.
But that's the penetration issue.
Yeah, it is.
Right.
But yeah. Any other questions? So I'd like to do a little promo, if I could.
Okay.
I would like, if I could suggest coming back to you guys and giving a presentation on the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Oh,
Yes.
yes,
Yes.
absolutely.
And it's a little close to my heart because I was on a destroyer blocking Cuba during that period of time, so I can give you some first-hand experience.
Yes,
And
indeed.
our job, I was the ASW officer on our ship. Our job was to find the Russian submarines. There were 4 Russian submarines out there, and we did find all 4 of them. So this is an amazing story about what none of us knew about the Cuban Missile Crisis when it ended in October of 1962. My opening line in the presentation is, at the end of the Cuban Missile Crisis, the world knew absolutely nothing about the darkest of dark secrets of the Cuban Missile Crisis. So I'd love to come back and give you that presentation.
Sure.
Absolutely.